What we're talking about is Jerome Powell, chairman of the Federal Reserve in America, and his decision about interest rates today. If he sends them down, it's because they think unemployment rising is the biggest problem. They need to start stimulating the economy. They need to start making borrowing cheaper so we can hopefully stop a bad trend in unemployment. If he puts them flat, it's because they don't really know. It's because they're holding and waiting and seeing and being, he's going to say data dependent like 100 times today. And this is likely what's going to happen. And if for whatever small off chance that he raises them, that means he thinks inflation is the biggest problem. We have to stop inflation from roaring back. If that happens, it's going to trigger a huge showdown between him and Trump. Trump is going to try to get him removed from his job because Trump really wants interest rates to go down. For politicians in general, they want interest rates to go down because it makes their job easier, stimulates the economy in the short term. So this is like the big question today. I think we're going to see this, but what matters is how he explains it, how he talks about it, how he answers questions, how many times he says dual mandate, how many times he says data dependent. Is a Puxatawny, what do I want? Oh, I wouldn't know if any of these could change what's happening in America right now. What would make inflation go crazy? Okay, so the idea is lowering interest rates too quickly could cause the economy to overheat and inflation to roar back. I mean, that combined with tariffs would be very difficult for people wanting lower grocery prices, I'll tell you that. You know, the size of the cut also matters. Like if he cuts 0.25, it's different than if he cuts a jumbo cut, which is 0.5. It's coming out! I repeat, he does not have that shit on. I repeat. He does not have that shit on.
Recent indications, however, point to a moderation in consumer spending following the rapid growth seen over the second half of 2024.
Okay.
Surveys of households and businesses point to heightened uncertainty about the economic outlook.
Yes, correct.
It remains to be seen how these developments might affect future spending and investment.
Badly.
In the labor market, conditions remain solid. Payroll job gains
averaged
200,000 per month over the past 3 months.
What
The
kind of
unemployment rate
jobs?
At 4.1%
Sorry, I'm
remains
heckling.
low and is held in a narrow range for the past year. In considering the extent and timing of additional adjustments to the target range for the federal funds rate, the committee will assess incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks.
He's saying, Trump, you're
We do
f***ing
not
things
need
up.
to be in a hurry to adjust our policy
But
stance.
we're not gonna lower interest rates like you
We are well
want.
positioned to wait for greater clarity. In our SEP, FOMC participants wrote down their individual assessments of an appropriate path for the federal funds rate based on what each participant judges to be the most likely scenario going forward.
Dude, these dot
An
plots are so
admittedly
stupid because they never
challenging
line up with what
exercise.
actually
At this time,
happens.
the
These
federal
dot
funds
plots
rate will be
are...
3.9% at the end of this year.
almost wanna mute
and
him.
3.4% at the end of next year. While these individual forecasts are always subject to uncertainty, as I noted, uncertainty today is unusually elevated.
Yeah.
And of course, these projections are not a committee plan or a decision.
Yeah, they're nothing. They're just
Policy
for
is
like
not
fuel,
on a
like
preset
TSA
course.
agents. All right, 6 times in the speech. Questions.
How much of the higher inflation forecast for this year is due to tariffs? And since the policy path remains, are you effectively reading this as a one-time price level shock?
In terms of your sort of looking through question, it can be the case that it's appropriate sometimes to look through inflation if it's going to go away quickly without action by us, if it's transitory, and that can be the case in the case.
You said it was transitory last time.
Tariff inflation. I think that would depend on the tariff.
We haven't got back to
inflation moving through
2%
fairly
yet.
quickly, and would depend critically as well on inflation expectations being well anchored, longer-term inflation expectations being well anchored.
I guess I'm looking at the out years here, and the fact that the policy path doesn't change at all, and inflation is unchanged in the out years, doesn't that imply you all have basically decided that there is no signal here, and that it's just we're back to transitory again?
So I think that's kind of the base case.
Good question.
But as I said, we really can't know that. We're going to have to see how
Yo,
things
what
actually
can you know,
work out.
Jerome
And in
Powell?
fact,
I have to mute it 1 second. I just want you guys to understand he is always trying to project stability and confidence. That's really his job. Just read everything the fact that he wants to make everything seem cool and good and normal and fine. That's
And
his
answer,
whole job. It's like everything's good, everything's fine.
questionnaires
And I don't blame him. He has to
further
do that. He doesn't
out.
want to cause panic.
And how much weight do you put on the deterioration in consumer confidence surveys? You said recently that this is perhaps
Good
not
question.
the best indication of future spending, but I'm curious, what you think is behind this deterioration and to what
consumer confidence
extent
is plummeting.
it could be a leading indicator for hard data.
We do see pretty solid hard data still. So growth looks like it's maybe moderating a bit, consumer spending moderating a bit, but still at a solid pace. Unemployment's 4.1%. Job creation most recently has been at a healthy level. Inflation has started to move up now, we think partly in response to tariffs, and there may be a delay
What about
further
hours worked,
progress
Jerome
over the
Powell?
course
Why
of
is
this
that
year.
declining?
So that's the hard data. Overall, it's a solid picture. As I mentioned the other day, as you pointed out,
This man kinda cute.
The relationship
He is kind of
between
a cutie.
survey data and actual economic activity hasn't been very tight. There have been plenty of times where people are saying very downbeat things about the economy and then going out and buying a new car. But we don't know that will be the case here. We will be watching very carefully
Could be different
for signs
people,
of weakness
Jerome
in the
Powell.
real data. Of course we will. But
Could be the bottom
given
half of
where
the
we are, we
case
think
saying
our
they're having a
policy's
tough
in good
time, and then the
place,
top 10% buying a new car.
to react.
Can you say that today, that we have that price stability, that households and businesses are ignoring price growth?
Why do they keep cutting the mic on good questions?
Buy in advance, psychology, big changes in inventories, and surveys that show consumers, at least in the short run, expect higher inflation.
I think a world where people can make their daily economic decisions in businesses and they're not having to think about the possibility of significantly
Yeah, we'd
high
love that.
inflation. We know inflation will bounce around. That is price stability. I think we were getting closer and closer to that. I wouldn't say we were at that. Inflation was
he's
running
pissed at
around
tariffs.
2.5% for some time. I do think with the arrival of the tariff inflation, further progress may be
he's so
delayed.
pissed
The
at
S&P
tariffs.
doesn't really show
He's
further
like, I
downward
raised
progress on
higher for
inflation
longer
this
for
year, and
so
that's
long.
really,
We finally got inflation
so
almost down,
delayed.
and then
But
you
if
brought
look at
these
the
fucking
forecasts,
tariffs
we
in.
do-
If that's the case, why are there cuts in the S&P for 2025?
Again, people wrote down
'Cause
two
unemployment's
cuts
rising-
the last time,
rising.
and they look at the
He doesn't want to say
they
it.
wrote down meaningful decline in growth.
Yeah.
From 2.1 to
Dude, they're
1.7 in
calling it out.
2025. A tick up in the unemployment rate, so not much.
We're
there,
going to have
but core
stagflation.
inflation up by
We're
3
going to have
tenths. And so those two
tariff-induced
kind of-
inflation
kind of
while the
balance each other
economy
out.
is
So
still
people-
backsliding
not
on
everybody, but
jobs.
On balance, people wrote down.
gonna be the
similar
worst
numbers. The
mandate
changes aren't
ever.
that big.
With near 4% unemployment rate, that should be low enough to bring people in from the sidelines in terms of hiring. But we're seeing the hiring rates have been stuck at 2023, 2024 levels. So what's going on there?
The hiring rate is quite low, but so is the layoff rate. So you look at initial claims or layoffs, so you're not seeing people losing their jobs, but you're seeing that people who don't have a job having to wait longer and longer.
This is true.
And
This is true.
the question is, which way does
This is
that break?
100%
If we were
true.
to see a meaningful
And
increase in
the way it's going
layoffs,
to break
then
is
that would
a
probably
rise in
translate
layoffs.
fairly
Yes.
quickly
Jerome
into
Powell, don't pretend like it's not going to
unemployment
happen.
because people are,
The way it always
it's
breaks
not
is a
it's not
rise in
big
layoffs.
hiring
The
market.
company doesn't want to
We've
get
been
rid of everybody
watching
because they spend
that,
time
and
getting
it's just
them,
not in the
so they
data.
stop
It hasn't
hiring.
happened. What
And
we've
then
had
they
is
start
a
firing.
low hiring situation, and it seems to be in balance now for
No,
for
dude.
the last 6, 7, 8 months.
No.
That's where we are.
No, it's not
there's
in balance.
healthy
It's not
levels of job
Goldilocks.
creation too. So overall, it's a
No,
labor
dude.
market that's in balance.
But
and,
he
you know,
knows
we
this.
watch
He's
it very
just saying
carefully.
it. He's just.
So then, have we seen the new administration's policies in the economic numbers yet? And when do you anticipate that happening?
In labor or in other?
In labor and inflation, just across the economy, have we started to see the new policies take effect in the numbers?
This
way.
Fox
I mean, it's
business
only been a
guy is
few
trying to get him to
months,
say
right?
no so they can blame it all on
for
Biden.
example, the layoffs. We've had two very strong goods inflation readings in the last 2 months, which is very unexpected. And I think hard to trace it to specific
Bro, he
tariffs.
hates
but
tariffs.
It must have,
He
it
hates
must have something
tariffs.
to do with, it's either noise and it'll come back, and that's very possible too.
He's
But if
in
it
his
is
nicest
persistent,
possible
then it
way
must
saying
be to
tariffs
do
are
with,
fucking over
people
inflation.
buying ahead of tariffs or raising prices ahead of tariffs and things like that. Those kinds of things happen, and they're very, very hard to capture because so much of it is indirect.
You said transitory price increases from tariffs are the base case. Transitory is the base case. Wasn't it the base case last time? And didn't the FOMC forecast lower inflation ahead last time? And wasn't the lesson that it quickly got into services, haircuts, daycare, everything else? And so I'm just wondering why the nine
Oh,
aren't
he's
taking that
spitting.
on board and are
He's
cutting
spitting.
twice this year.
He's
Time,
fucking
are you talking about
spitting.
the last?
Pandemic, yes, during the
Because you
pandemic.
could have been talking about the last time there were tariffs, in which case the inflation was transitory. You know, it's still the truth. If there's an inflationary impulse that's going to go away on its own, it's not the right policy to tighten policy, because by the time you have your effect, you're in effect by design you are lowering economic activity and employment. And if that's not necessary, you don't want to do it. In real time, as we know, it's hard to make that judgment. But I mean, we have to look at this as a different situation. There are differences and similarities. I mean, it's a different time. You know, we haven't had real price stability fully reestablished yet, and we have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, we still haven't. There's now Zoomers who haven't had it for half their lives, or
to take on
a third of their lives.
Yesterday, the UCLA Anderson forecast said a high probability of a recession. Where do you stand on whether or not the slowdown you're seeing creates a higher probability of concern that you may have on recession? Thank you.
You know, there's always an unconditional possibility of a recession. It might be broadly in the range of 1 in 4 at any time. If you look back through the years, it could be within 12 months a 1 in 4 chance of a recession. So the question is whether this current situation, those possibilities are elevated. We don't make such a forecast. If you look at outside forecasts, forecasters have generally raised, a number of them have raised their possibility of a recession, but still at relatively moderate levels. You know, still in the region of the traditional, because they were extremely low. If you go back 2 months, people were saying that
this is a marked change of pace.
Extremely low. So
he went from never saying it to being like, yeah, there's a 1 in 4 shot every year. Who knows?
President Trump fired 2 members of the Federal Trade Commission, an independent agency. This could cause the kind of legal fight about the administration's power to fire independent people.
This is a big deal. I need to talk about this more.
If those firings stand, is that a threat to the Fed's independence? Could he do the same thing to the Fed board?
I think I did answer that question in this very room some time ago, and I have no desire to change that answer and have nothing new for you on that today.
I wanted to go back to the consumer sentiment, particularly the inflation expectations in the University of Michigan survey. In the summer of 2022, you cited the rise in the long-term inflation expectations in that index as the reason that you went big with a 3/4 point hike. So I know you've talked about all the different measures now, but you seem to not be placing the same weight on that, and so I'm just wondering.
Great question.
Are you dismissing that?
Great
what
question.
we saw last week from the University of Michigan, or does that carry the same weight as it did in the past?
So I mentioned it back then, but in no way did I place a huge weight on it. I think that was a ex post story, but it wasn't the case. That was a preliminary reading, and so is this. And it's also, this is that Michigan, the one you're referring to, the longer term thing. You know, we look at it, we don't dismiss data that we don't like. We force ourselves to look at it, but it is an outlier compared to market-based and compared to other survey-based assessments of longer.
Damn, he's getting grilled today.
Expectations.
He's getting grilled today.
And
keep your chin up, Jerome.
Do you think it's going to be hard to get clarity in a government by tweet? I mean, do you have a feeling that at some point you actually will have a forecast you can trust?
Yes, I think we will. It's hard to say when that will be. These decisions are going to be made, and they're going to be implemented, and then we'll know. At that point, we'll know what the decisions are, and we'll have to make assessments then about the implications for the economy. Those things will happen. A lot of them will happen over the course of, in coming months, certainly over the course of this year. And we'll be adapting as we go. And I do think that the first 2 months of this year are a great example. You've got high readings for goods inflation after a string of readings that average close to zero, and you have to ask, it's coming during tariffs, but you can't. It's very hard to actually scientifically go back and match up those increases and say,
he's
yes,
doing everything but saying it directly
from tariffs, but it kind of has to be to some extent. Plus noise. There can be idiosyncratic readings in various categories.
Screaming.
Which will shortly
Tariffs
reverse,
are causing inflation, but I don't know. I mean, it could be. We're seeing a lot of inflation when there's tariffs.
Where that
but who
knows?
knows?
From, but that's another case where I think it's going to be very, very challenging to unpack the inflation that we see over the course of this year and be able to say with confidence how much of that came from inflation and how much of it, from tariffs and how much of it didn't.
So consumer sentiment has dipped dramatically, but you say the economy and the hard data is still solid. What is your message to consumers that clearly disagree and don't feel that strength? Because the hard data they're looking at is their grocery bill.
Damn.
Okay, so a couple things. The grocery bill is about past inflation, really. There was inflation in 21, 2, and 3, and prices went up. The current level, it's not the change in prices, it's they're unhappy and they're not not wrong to be unhappy that prices went up quite a bit, and they're paying a lot for those things. So I think that is the fundamental fact, and has been for a long time, a couple of years, why people are unhappy with the economy. It's not that the economy is not growing. It's not that inflation is really high. It's not that unemployment is high. It's none of those things. We have 4.1% unemployment. We've got 2% growth.
The job quality matters, Jerome Powell.
People are unhappy because of the price level, and we completely understand and accept that.
And just to follow up, why are you still projecting 2 rate cuts this year if your own projections show inflation higher for longer? Does that mean you see a slowdown in economic growth as a real threat?
Yes.
So
yes.
I think if you
good questions.
Remember we came into this with at the December meeting, the median was 2 cuts. The median was. And so you come in and you see, broadly speaking, weaker growth but higher inflation, and they kind of balance each other out. So you think, and unemployment is really only a 1/10.
They balance each other out for you.
There's just not a big
for the
change in
average
forecast.
consumer,
There
that's not
really isn't.
balance. That's just 2 shitty things.
So I would tell people that the economy seems to be healthy. We understand that sentiment is quite negative at this time, and that probably has to do with turmoil at the beginning of an administration that's making big changes in areas of policy.
Everyone's so stupid. When they say their economy's bad, they're all wrong.
Is more
when they say it's hard to find a job, when they say they're not seeing their wages go up, when they're saying the prices of everything they got go up, they're wrong. They're stupid.
Thanks very much.
Everyone clap for Jerome Powell. He did his best. Did a lot of dual mandate. I don't think he got to 10, though. I don't think he got to 10. Nothing crazy, nothing too out there, nothing too new, except for, I guess, the overriding theme that was different about this one than previous FOMC meetings is how negative Jerome Powell was on tariffs. Was clearly sending a strong indication that they are a weapon against growth and they cause higher inflation. He was essentially offloading, the blame is the right word, but like there's been a recent spike in inflation expectations, and that's coming from tariffs, according to him. So I think he still is, I don't know if intentionally or not, but being deliberately obtuse, being deliberately about the job market and equating all jobs in all industries as the same when clearly there's a deterioration in like good white collar, well-paying jobs. There's a deterioration in private sector jobs from like growing companies. And really what's propping it up is government spending and healthcare jobs, which are like the only thing where you can still have any growth. Anyone who doesn't work in those industries is really feeling the downturn. I think there's a lack of discussion around how over half of our consumer spending is done by the top 10%. So like you can look at broad data and be like, well, people are still spending, but it's becoming more and more concentrated on an elite, wealthy, top of the K-shaped class. And that part of the economy only spends when they feel like their investments are doing good. So as the market gets shakier, like if the stock market has, a few more down days, that really cuts back on their spending. They stop going on trips and spending lavish, whatever. It's a lot of that stuff is not discussed in these things, and I know that he can't necessarily do it, but my takeaway from that is that they are seeing more stress from both sides of their dual mandate, which is like inflation does not seem stable and safe and low, so that's scary. They want to raise rates to fight that. And then growth seems like a real slowdown, and like unemployment's rising. And they're going to fight that by lowering rates. So they're kind of stuck in the middle. And so he's kind of like just battening down the hatches and like, we're going to wait and see. But it's not a great sign. That's sort of my takeaway.